Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we'll be looking at human evolution.
A fascinating journey, millions of years.
Exactly. We're using excerpts from the Wikipedia article on human evolution. So, from early primates to modern humans, we'll cover it all.
It's definitely not a straight line, though. It's a lot more complicated than you might think.
That's what makes it so interesting. We're going to uncover some amazing things and maybe even bust a few myths along the way. Ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's go back in time. Way, way back.
Okay, let's rewind the clock. Over 55 million years ago, the first primates appear. Can you picture it? Dinosaurs roaming around, and then, boom, primates enter the scene.
Hard to imagine that kind of time scale, isn't it? And what's interesting is one of those early primates, Notharctus tenebrosus, lived in Eurasia.
Wait, really? I always thought our earliest ancestors were in Africa.
Well, it seems they might have migrated from Eurasia to Africa later on. That's where the later evolution of hominids happened.
Wow, so our roots might be in Eurasia. That's a game changer. So how did these early primates lead to us?
Think of it like a family tree. It branches out.
Okay, I'm following you.
So you got lemurs, lories, galagos, they all share a common ancestor with us. But the branch that leads to monkeys, apes, and humans, that's the one we're focusing on, the anthropoids.
Got it, anthropoids. So at some point, we split from the other apes, right? Like our chimpanzee cousins.
Exactly. And to understand that split, you need to look at genetics.
Okay, genetics. Hit me with it.
Human DNA. It's 98.4% identical to chimpanzee DNA.
Seriously. Wow, that's crazy.
Shows how closely related we are. Millions of years ago, there was a creature that was the ancestor of humans, gorillas, and chimps, all three.
Mind-blowing. But if we're so closely related, why don't we have more fossils of chimp ancestors?
It's about where they lived. Apes, especially gorillas and chimps, lived in rainforests.
Ah, I see.
The rainforests don't preserve bones well. The soil is too acidic. So we know the lineage is split like 8 to 9 million years ago, but the fossil record for apes is pretty patchy.
So it's like some chapters of the story are missing. Fascinating. Okay, let's get back to our ancestors, those early hominins. What made them different?
The big change, walking on 2 legs. Bipedalism.
Right. I've always heard that was a key moment. But why was it so important?
It had a domino effect, you could say. It freed up our hands, changed how we moved, even how we interacted socially.
So it wasn't just about standing up, it was about everything that came after.
Exactly. Freed up our hands for tools, you see. We could see further, carry things, communicate differently. The article talks about the changes in the pelvis, spine, feet, all because of bipedalism.
It's like a whole body makeover. And the article mentions something about Ardipithecus ramidus suggests they were more peaceful than chimps.
Yeah, that challenges the old view of humans as coming from a chimp-like ancestor. Chimps might have developed aggression later on.
So maybe we didn't inherit aggression, we evolved away from it.
That's one theory. Evolution, it's full of surprises. It's not always a straight line.
Definitely not a straight line. So we've got these bipedal, maybe peaceful ancestors. What's next? The article talks about Australopithecus.
Australopithecus. They thrived in Africa for over 2 million years. A lot of variety within that genus, too. You can't talk about Australopithecus without mentioning Lucy, though.
Ah, Lucy. That iconic skeleton. Why was she so important?
Lucy, an Australopithecus afarensis, had a really well-preserved skeleton. Her pelvis and leg bones, remarkably similar to ours. It proved that early hominins were walking upright.
So she was like a window into the past, showed us how they moved millions of years ago.
Exactly. And within Australopithecus, there were different forms. Robust and gracile.
Robust and gracile, what's the difference?
Robust ones, like A. robustus and A. boyci, had big skulls, powerful jaws. They ate tough plants, roots, seeds. Gracile forms, like Lucy, A. afarensis, had more delicate features. Probably ate softer foods, fruits, leaves. Different diets, different adaptations.
Like different tools for different jobs, but were they all really part of the same genus?
Some scientists say the robust ones might belong to a different genus, Paranthropus. It's still debated. New evidence can change everything.
Always keeps things interesting, right?
Definitely. Keeps us on our toes. The article also mentions a couple of other interesting finds. A. diarmida, maybe lived around the same time as Lucy, and then A. Prometheus, or Littlefoot.
A Littlefoot. That's a cool nickname for a fossil.
One of the most complete Australopithecus skeletons ever found, and it suggests they were good climbers. Maybe even built nests in trees.
So even though they were walking upright, they were still hanging out in trees. That's interesting.
Shows how adaptable they were.
Okay, so we've got these bipedal, tool-using, tree-climbing ancestors. But when does our genus Homo appear?
Around 2.8 million years ago, enter Homo habilis,
Handyman.
handyman. I'm guessing they were using tools.
That's right. We found simple stone tools at sites like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, stone flakes and choppers.
Those early tools must have been revolutionary, open up new possibilities. Definitely. Access to new foods like meat, cutting, scraping, digging those tools could do a lot.
So a big step forward. But I bet there's some debate about Homo habilis too.
Of course. Some researchers say they weren't so different from the Australopiths. Their skeletons suggest they were still adapted to trees.
Ah, so maybe they weren't quite handyman after all. It's like those early stages are a bit blurry, a mix of old and new traits.
Exactly. It's a transition period for sure. And from here, we start to see something else. Brains getting bigger.
A bigger brain. That sounds like a major development. Who are we talking about now?
Homo erectus, first discovered in Indonesia in the late 1800s. The Java man, they called it.
Java man. I love these nicknames. What's the story there?
At first, people thought it was ape-like, but then they found the Peking man fossils in China.
Okay, so two different fossils, same species.
It turned out they were both Homo erectus, and they had much larger brains than Homo habilis.
So this is where we see a real cognitive leap.
It seems so. And there's some debate about whether H. erectus in Asia and H. ergaster in Africa were the same species or different. But regardless, they were making more advanced tools.
Really? Like what?
More sophisticated hand axes, for example. And there's evidence they might have been using fire.
Fire. Now we're talking. What kind of evidence?
Controlled fires at Homo erectus sites dating back almost 1 million years. Some researchers think they weren't just using it for warmth and light.
Really? What else would they be using it for?
Cooking. There's a hypothesis by Richard Wrangham that cooking was crucial for Homo evolution.
Cooking. Interesting. Tell me more.
Wrangham argues that cooking made food easier to digest, more nutrients, and it could even detoxify some plants. All that extra energy, it could have fueled the growth of our brains.
So a simple act like cooking could have been a major evolutionary driver.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And it makes sense. We're not just adapting to the environment, we're changing it, even back then.
Absolutely. And those changes have ripple effects shaping our evolution. We see this with Homo erectus as well.
So bigger brains, better tools, mastery of fire. Sounds like Homo erectus was on a roll, but what about those other Homo species the article mentions, like H. rhodesiensis and the Gowie's cranium?
Those might be intermediate species, you could say. Links between H. erectus and later species like us, H. sapiens and H. neanderthalensis.
So like missing pieces of the puzzle. Always more to discover.
And that's what makes it so fascinating. Okay, so we have these diverse Homo species, but where do the Neanderthals fit in?
Neanderthals. I've always been curious about them. Weren't they like brutish cavemen?
That's the old stereotype. But it turns out they were much more sophisticated than we once thought. They had bigger brains than us, for one thing.
Really? Bigger brains? You're kidding. Real?
Nope, it's true. Doesn't necessarily mean they were smarter, though. Brain size isn't everything. What's interesting is their skulls show they had adaptations for better vision in low light.
Ah, useful for those icy European winters. So what about their culture? Were they really just solitary cave dwellers?
Not at all. We found evidence they cared for their sick, buried their dead, maybe even had symbolic thought. They weren't these unintelligent brutes we once imagined.
That's amazing. So why did they disappear? What happened to the Neanderthals?
It's a big question. Maybe they were outcompeted by us, Homo sapiens. But here's a twist. Genetic studies have shown that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens interbred.
Wait, we interbred with Neanderthals? Seriously?
Seriously, modern humans outside of Africa, they carry about 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA.
Wow, that changes everything. So they didn't just disappear, they became part of us. We're carrying a bit of them with us today.
Exactly. And speaking of other human relatives, have you heard of the Denisovans?
Denisovans. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
They were only discovered recently in 2010 from a finger bone in Siberia. Just a tiny bone. And it revealed a whole new human lineage.
It's amazing what we can learn from a single bone. What do we know about these Denisovans? Were they like Neanderthals?
Related, but different. Their DNA has been found in people living in Melanesia, Southeast Asia, Australia. But we don't have many fossils, so they're still pretty mysterious.
It sounds like there's a lot more to uncover about them. We've got Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia. Any other surprises out there?
I remember Homo floresiensis, the hobbit.
Oh yeah, the tiny humans on the island of Flores.
Well, they were alive at the same time as Neanderthals and Denisovans. Overlapping, but in a completely different part of the world.
Wow, so many different human species all at once. It's mind-blowing. So where do we, Homo sapiens, fit into this picture?
That's the big question, and that's what we'll dive into next. The emergence of Homo sapiens around 300,000 years ago. It's a turning point in human evolution, a story for another time. So, we left off with Homo sapiens appearing in Africa about 300,000 years ago.
Right? Big question is, what happened next?
Yeah.
How did we become the only humans left, spreading all over the globe?
Well, for a long time, there were two main ideas about how that happened.
Two ideas. Lay it on me.
One was the multi-regional hypothesis. It said Homo evolved as one big population, with regional differences popping up over time. But the out of Africa theory, that said modern humans evolved in Africa pretty recently, and then migrated out, replacing other Homo species.
Okay, two very different scenarios. Which one turned out to be right?
As always with human evolution, it's complicated. The out of Africa model, it's got the most support from genetics. But there was some mixing, too.
Mixing. Like interbreeding.
Exactly. We can look at mitochondrial DNA from the mother and Y chromosome DNA from the father.
Okay, makes sense. Use those to trace ancestry.
Right, and both point to a recent African origin for all modern humans. But there's also evidence for some interbreeding with Neanderthals, Denisovans, as Homo sapiens moved out of Africa.
So it wasn't a complete replacement. It's like our family history. It's got different threads woven together.
Yeah.
Fascinating. But what gave Homo sapiens that initial advantage? Why did we succeed when other humans didn't?
The article mentions a few things, but it's likely a combination of factors working together.
All right, break it down for me. What were the key ingredients in our success story?
Well, we've talked about brain size. Homo sapiens has a larger brain, especially the areas for language, planning, social behavior.
Right, those are all crucial for a complex society.
Yeah.
But other Homo species had bigger brains too, right? What made ours so special?
Our brains are wired differently. The prefrontal cortex, it's the area for decision-making, social stuff. Ours is larger, more interconnected than in other human species.
So more connections, more processing power.
You got it. Might explain why we developed complex social structures, cooperated better, adapted quicker.
It's not just about size, it's about how you use it, right?
Yeah.
But what about culture? How did that play a role?
Culture is huge. We're amazing at learning from each other, passing down knowledge, building on what came before.
Right. We talked about that great leap forward around 50,000 years ago. Like suddenly culture exploded.
It's a turning point, and it sets us up for everything that comes later. Agriculture, cities, the whole interconnected world we live in now.
Mind-blowing. So were there any changes in our brains back then? Or was it something else that triggered this cultural revolution?
Hard to say for sure. Some think there might have been a genetic change, boosting brain power. Others say it was a gradual cultural evolution.
Like, which came first, the brain or the culture? It's probably both, right? They influence each other.
Most likely. But whatever the cause, the Great Leap Forward changes everything. It's like a new chapter begins.
Okay, so we've got brains, culture, what else? Oh, the article mentions dexterity, our hands.
The human hand. It's an engineering marvel. Opposable thumbs, flexible fingers.
It's true, we can do so much with our hands. Never really thought about it that way.
But it's crucial. Tools, art, everything. And tools then lead to technology, which impacts our evolution further. The article says human evolution has actually sped up since agriculture and cities developed.
Wow, that's interesting. I guess our lifestyles were changing so dramatically our bodies had to keep up.
It's adaptation in action. For example, living in cities close together, that helped diseases spread.
Oh yeah, makes sense.
So people with genes that resisted those diseases, they survived, passed those genes on. Natural selection.
Survival of the fittest, city edition. And what about agriculture? How did that change us?
Huge shift in diet. We went from being hunter-gatherers, eating all sorts of things, to relying on a few crops.
So we basically put all our eggs in one basket, food-wise.
In a way, yes. And that led to changes in our digestive system, even our jaws and teeth.
So even something as basic as chewing changed because of how we were getting our food. That's crazy. It really highlights how our culture and biology are intertwined.
Absolutely. And that's still happening today. What we do, the environments we create, they all impact how we evolve.
Give me an example. Like what?
Antibiotic resistance. We overuse antibiotics.
Yeah, I've heard that's a problem.
It is. We're basically pushing bacteria to evolve resistance. Evolution happening in real time, right before our eyes.
Kind of scary when you think about it. Our actions have consequences for the evolution of other species too.
And for our own species as well, which is why understanding evolution is so important.
Okay, I'm getting that now. Human evolution, it's not just a story from the past. It's happening right now, and it will continue to happen.
Exactly. It's ongoing. And it's way more complex than just, apes turning into humans. It's a branching tree, lots of different species, interactions, surprises.
Right, not a straight line at all.
Uh,
Starting to see that now. But let's shift gears a bit. We talked about all these other human species. What about our own Homo sapiens?
Time to dive into how we became the dominant species on the planet.
Let's do it.
Oh.
Okay, so Homo sapiens. What set us apart? What made us so successful?
Well, it's like we've been talking about, right? It's not just one thing. A mix of factors. Adaptations, a bit of luck, all playing together.
Right, right. So our brains, they were a big part of it, I'm guessing.
Definitely larger brain size,
Oh.
enhanced cognitive abilities, those were key, especially the parts of the brain dealing with language, planning, social stuff.
Yeah, but didn't Neanderthals have bigger brains than us? So what made our brains different?
It's about the wiring, you see, how it's organized. Our prefrontal cortex, the part that handles complex thinking, decision-making, social interactions, it's bigger and more interconnected than in other human species.
So it's not just about size, it's about the connections.
Exactly. More connections, more processing power. Could be why we developed those complex social structures, cooperated better, adapted faster to new situations.
Right, makes sense. But we also talked about culture, didn't we? How important that was.
Culture's huge. Our ability to learn from each other, to pass knowledge down through generations, that's what sets us apart.
Like that great leap forward, that explosion of creativity, was that a sudden brain upgrade or something? What triggered that?
It's still debated. Maybe a genetic mutation, a boost in brain power, maybe a gradual cultural evolution.
Chicken or the egg, huh?
Yeah,
Which came first? Probably a bit of both working together.
likely. But whatever the cause, that great leap forward changed everything. More complex tools, art, symbolism. It sets the stage for agriculture, cities, everything that comes after.
And our hands too, right? Our dexterity, we talked about that.
The human hand. Amazing piece of evolution. Opposable thumbs, flexible fingers. No other primate has a hand quite like ours.
We take it for granted, but yeah, we can do so much with our hands.
Exactly. That's what allowed us to make and use such a wide variety of tools. Gave us a huge advantage.
So brains, culture, dexterity, it's like the ultimate survival kit.
Yeah.
But what about our interactions with other human species? Neanderthals, Denisovans, was it all just competition?
It's more nuanced than that. We competed for resources, for sure, but there was also interbreeding.
Right, we talked about that. We've got Neanderthal DNA in us, and some people have Denisovan DNA too.
It wasn't just a one-time thing either. This interbreeding, it actually influenced our evolution. Those genes, they might have given us advantages as we moved into new environments.
So it wasn't just about Homo sapiens being better, it was about incorporating the strengths of other human species.
Exactly, like borrowing the best tools from your neighbors. It highlights the importance of genetic diversity. The more variety you have, the better equipped you are to adapt to new situations.
Wow, so it's this complex story of competition and cooperation all mixed together. Really makes you think. But looking ahead now, what about the future of human evolution? Where do we go from here?
It's the big question, isn't it? And a tough one to answer. But one thing's for sure. Technology is going to play a huge role.
Yeah, technology is changing everything so fast, it's hard to keep up. How do you think it will shape our evolution?
Well, think about how much time we spend on screens, our reliance on digital devices. It could be changing our eyesight, our attention spans.
I know I have trouble focusing these days. Too much social media, maybe.
Our brains are incredibly adaptable. They're constantly rewiring themselves in response to our environment. So who knows, maybe our descendants will be amazing multitaskers, but they might struggle to read a book.
A bit scary, but kind of exciting too, right?
Yeah.
What else? Any other predictions?
Another big one is climate change.
Ah, the elephant in the room. How will that impact human evolution, do you think?
Well, it's going to create new challenges, new pressures. Heat, drought, food shortages. Those who can tolerate those conditions will have an advantage. So we might see changes in skin pigmentation, body size, metabolism.
So the planet is changing, and we'll have to change with it.
We're still evolving, adapting. It's a continuous process. But remember, humans are incredibly resilient. We've faced huge challenges before, and we've found ways to overcome them.
Right. Ice ages, pandemics. We've been through a lot.
We adapt, we innovate. That's what we do.
Yeah.
Maybe these challenges will even lead to new discoveries, new technologies that help us adapt even faster.
Okay, so we've got technology, climate change, all these forces shaping our future. Any other wild predictions?
This one's a bit more out there, but some scientists think we might see the emergence of new human species.
New human species. Hold on, is this a sci-fi movie scenario?
Not quite. But as humans continue to spread out, exploring new environments, space even, it's possible isolated groups could evolve in different directions, eventually becoming distinct species. It's happened before, it's not impossible.
Wow, so the human family tree, it could keep branching out. That's incredible.
And then there's genetic engineering, biotechnology, those could play a role too. Who knows what the future holds?
Designer babies, gene editing. It's a whole other conversation.
Definitely a topic for another deep dive. But for now, I think we've covered a lot. The past, the present, and the future of human evolution. The big takeaway. It's not over. The human story is still being written.
I love that.
Yeah.
We're not just passive characters in this story. We're shaping it as we go.
Exactly. And understanding evolution, it's crucial. It helps us make sense of who we are, where we came from, and where we might be headed.
And it reminds us that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves, connected to all life on this planet.
Exactly. So as we think about the future, let's do it with a sense of responsibility, humility, and a deep appreciation for this incredible journey we're all on.
Well said. It's been a fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep evolving.